Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Culture Connection from FI Strategies. I'm Paul Robert. Great to see everyone again. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to continue to provide different perspectives on cultures in today's business and maybe some tips and assistance in building your culture at your credit union and your organization, trying to level up and find that next gear that you need to find in order to really differentiate yourself as you continue to move forward. Today we have a really special guest with us, Jillian Reilly, who is the author of the book 10 Permissions, Redefining the Rules of Adulting in the 21st Century. What a great title that is. Hi, Jill. How are you? Great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. And I'm so thrilled to be here and kind of be a part of your ongoing conversations about the role of culture in organizational growth and change, because honestly, I think it's never been more important for leaders to focus on that subject. So, super timely conversations.
Yeah, I want to get into your perspective on that exactly, Jill, because
Mm.
we talk about it's changed, but what does that mean exactly, and how has it changed, and so on and so forth. But before we go there, let's get to know you a little bit better. Take a minute or two or five, whatever, to introduce us to Jillian Riley. Brag on yourself a little bit. Tell us your story,
Oh,
Jill.
okay. Well, I do have an interesting story to tell. I think I'm not
Okay.
your normal guest. Um, In that, I guess my 30 plus year career has been focused in incredibly different ways on helping people navigate really significant change. And for me, that started straight out of university. It was 1993, which tells you how old I am.
Everybody's
But
calculating now, Jill.
yeah,
Just what your age is.
it,
Yeah.
you definitely know, right? Yeah, I revealed my generation immediately, so we can establish that. But for people who don't know, it was a time when South Africa, where I'm currently based, was going through a massive social transition. It was holding its first democratic elections in 1994, and bright-eyed and wanting to save the world, me was sitting in Chicago and watching this take place and thinking, I want to be there. So I got myself to South Africa in 1994 to witness these elections. And I guess what it did was plant a seed for me of curiosity and interest around what does it take for people to navigate change, to try to
Mhm.
adopt very different behaviors, to, in this case, they were talking about apartheid South Africa becoming the new South Africa. And I was like, can you make yourself new? What does
Right.
that
Yeah.
take? So at a very young age, I started to get curious about, people going through major transitions and changes in their lives. I was supposed to only be there for 6 months, be here actually, because I'm still here. But I was kind of hooked, and I started to do a lot of work with nonprofit organizations. I started to work with communities. Really, the focus there was around organizational change, organizational development, and leadership and strategy. And it gave me just the most incredible education in, yeah, helping people find their way through transition and change. And over the course of the years, that turned into working with corporates, it turned into working in other parts of the world, and with individuals. And I guess it's sort of the thread throughout my whole career is, yeah, how do we adopt new behaviors? How do we
Mhm.
adapt to changing conditions? And obviously, we're going to get to it, but that has never been more relevant than now as we all kind of try and find our way through what feels like kind of dizzying levels of change. So, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, two words I want to circle back on. Um,
Hmm.
Curious. You mentioned that you had a curiosity. I, I I
Mm.
find that to be such a tremendous trait in individuals, but leaders in particular. And looks like you concur with that, right, Jill?
Oh, 100%. And I have to say that the experience of being kind of thrown into very different circumstances at a relatively young age almost like forced that curiosity, right? Because I was
Yeah.
trying to figure things out a lot, find
Survive,
out,
maybe. Yeah.
survive.
Yeah.
Survival relied on curiosity. So it kind of embedded it in me. And, still to this day, I find myself, asking questions sometimes to a fault, wanting to know more. But again, yeah, at a time when things are happening and we're being confronted with the unfamiliar, the brand new, that curiosity is like such a superpower. So, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
absolutely with you that I think all of us kind of getting really intentional about cultivating our curiosity is key.
I love that, and we'll come back to that when we talk about the book, I'm sure. The other word
Mm,
before we get off of it, it was passion. You used it in the context of the South Africans and their passion for creating a new country, right? A new life
yeah,
for themselves.
yeah,
But
yeah.
passion manifests itself in a lot of different ways, but it's an important part of growing and surviving and thriving, right? And
Yeah.
change. Passion has got to be a big part of that, doesn't it?
Totally. I mean, I think we're kind of afraid of it. Like it feels a little bit
Mm.
unwieldy and like we don't know what to
Yeah.
do with it, especially in an organizational context where we're so
Right.
often preoccupied with order and structure and productivity. We're kind of like,
Right.
oh, but again, we'll get to it soon, but my first permission is be willful and really tap and leverage desire, because we all know that desire is the sort of life source of some of our best experiences and some of our most meaningful exchanges where, yeah, we're passionate about what we're doing and how we're growing and where we're going. So I think, again, navigating profound change means tapping into your own passion for what is it that you
Hmm.
want to create? What do you want to be a part of? And I don't think we should be as afraid of it as perhaps we are.
Yeah. And as an organization, we should also be passionate. And again, it manifests itself in different ways, but that's a big part of it. So, Uh,
Yeah,
great stuff. I think we could probably do a whole podcast just on passion and curiosity,
totally.
probably.
I would be there. I'll be there.
I figured you would. Um,
Yeah, sign me up.
let's, as you mentioned, you work with organizations and individuals across the globe.
Mhm.
Cultures are different, environments are different, of course, but in general, are you seeing anything, experiencing anything that maybe is universal that everybody's kind of grappling with right now, or maybe is challenged with right now that is something that is going to be a make it or break it type of situation going forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think everyone alive right now is grappling with what I describe in my book as kind of the unraveling. I think a lot of the ways of operating in the world are changing. The rules are changing, which is why the subtitle of the book is Redefining the Rules, because a lot of the old ways that we've understood of how to operate, whether that's at life or at work, are shifting. Institutions are not necessarily sort of providing the safety and the structure that they used to. People are getting laid off. AI is wiping out entire professions and whole kind of parts of organizations. I think there's a sense of disorientation in terms of moving from a time that was really largely stable and predictable, where progress, we could kind of see over a long term, to having sort of a set of variables that leaves us not feeling like we have a long, line of sight. We're not really sure of what the implications of technology are, and we have to learn incredibly quickly in order to keep up with it. So I think there's a sense for a lot of people that, they're not on solid footing. They don't necessarily, they can't turn to the old playbook to
Hmm.
know how to lead and manage, whether that's at work or even in their own lives.
Hmm.
Um, so, I think the time that we're in right now is both full of possibility because, the nature of the change means that we might be capable of doing things that we never even imagined. But at the
Hmm.
same time, it's causing a lot of us to kind of question whether or not, the mindsets and the ways of operating that we've always used are still going to serve us. Yeah, does that make sense?
It does. I was thinking while you were talking through that, that it's important to recognize that in yourself, but it's
Mm,
also maybe more powerful to recognize it in the people around you, right? And
yeah,
the fact that
right.
they may be going through the same thing, probably are. How can we help each other get through it, or how can we collaboratively survive this? So anyway,
Yeah,
it's
I
wide
think
reaching, isn't it?
it is. And I think, the kind of empathy that you've just referred to, the awareness that, also that unraveling that I talked about, I think leads to what we all know now, which is a blurring of lines between work and home. The boundaries that used to keep us sort of 9 to 5 and 5 days a week and
Hmm.
retire at 65 and all those things are, much, much more uncertain and porous now. And so we're bringing a lot more of ourselves to work, for better or for worse. We're kind
Right.
of, and we need to show up to each other then in ways that maybe even 10 years ago, we didn't have to. So I think that places a tremendous pressure on leaders in particular to kind of have to engage with a number of things that maybe they didn't think they had to.
Yeah.
And that awareness, that empathy that you've just talked about becomes not just a nice to do, it becomes actually strategic.
Hmm. Love that. So we call this podcast the Culture Connection. What you
Mm,
just described there really is at the heart of highly effective culture, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
it's got to be paramount in order for a culture to be highly effective.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said when we started, I'm so passionate about the issue of culture because no matter where I've been and what the situation it was, whether that was working, at a community level in Zimbabwe or at a corporate in Manhattan, the it always came back to culture. It always came back to um, how do I feel allowed to show up? What do I feel allowed to do? What is
Hmm.
it that we are allowed to do together? And that's culture. I mean, culture is all of the unspoken rules and ways of operating that sort of guide how we feel we're allowed to contribute or not to a
Hmm.
specific environment. So it's this, it's culture each strategy again,
Hmm. Hmm.
but because it is the single thing that will allow people to bring their best and to thrive or not. And
Yeah.
yet it's really challenging, I think, for leaders to begin to address it because so much of it is unspoken, so much of it is unsaid,
Right.
it's not
Right.
all written on the wall, it's not all there for everybody to see. So it's this really critical intangible that I think is ever more requiring a lot of attention.
We were talking before we hit record here about the idea that there's this mindset that culture is about making employees happy, right? And,
Right,
keeping them engaged. Um,
right,
but first and foremost, it's really about putting employees in a position to be successful, right?
right, totally.
And there's multiple definitions to that, but that really has to be a focus of a culture, is more so today maybe than ever. Agree?
Oh, totally. And I think we actually need to move the discussion beyond the perks and the, ping pong tables because that was 1990.
Come on, I like the
Um,
ping pong tables though, Jill.
I like ping pong tables too, but that's not culture. And that's not employee engagement. I think that the concept of culture was brought into our mainstream and into our common understanding through I'm going to intentionally create a more relaxed and a more familiar culture, which is, where it all started. And I think now what companies are looking for, what employees are looking for is not that alone. It's
Mhm.
an environment, as you just said, in which they can thrive, which is going to look different in every company. So, how, for me, with that as your starting point, not, oh, what are we going to give them that's going to keep them happy, whether it's free
Right.
lunches or,
Right.
with a strategic eye towards the types of processes and, structures that will allow for your best
Hmm.
contribution.
Yeah.
Well, that changes the conversation completely, doesn't it?
Yeah. Making work easy is goes a long way in making me happy. I know. I think most people too, but you don't think about
Totally.
that as part of culture, right? So.
Well, I think what happens is that, it's kind of, we're going to do business as usual, and then we're going to attach some perks around the edges, and then we're going to hope that we've sorted out the culture conversation. And it's like,
Yeah. Mm.
it's a much more integrated sort of approach to what is the environment, what is the way of operating here that we want to encourage and enable that will allow everyone to thrive. And of course,
Hmm.
there are going to be different perspectives about that. It's one of the reasons that, it's challenging because you
Yeah.
can't satisfy everybody, but that's not the point. The point is to, look at that real intentional curation of practices and ways of operating and behaving that, for the most part, meet your collective goals and satisfy individual needs to the extent that they
Hmm.
can. And to me, that's, if you attend to that, you take care of so many other things.
Yeah. You use the word challenge, challenging,
Mm.
and one of the challenges in business environment today, you and I co-authored an article on, and that's Gen Z, the younger generation coming into the
Yeah,
workforce,
yeah.
has different characteristics, at least predominantly different characteristics than their predecessors. Certainly,
Mm.
an old farts like me. Um,
Yeah, and me.
but well, I didn't want to say that, Jill.
That's
Um,
fine. I already said I was in college in
I
1993,
know.
so I've
Right, right.
established this.
And your kids make it well known how old you are, I
Of
know.
course,
So,
they do
yeah.
every day.
But there are unique qualities about Gen Z, are there not? And I know you've dug into that far more than I have, but I guess the point of the article and the point I'd like to reiterate here is okay, maybe it is a challenge, but it's also a real opportunity, a distinct opportunity to help facilitate that change and that evolution that you've talked about.
Totally. I mean, there will be nobody better amongst you to kind of embed an adaptive quality into your environment than those younger people. So, I
Mm.
guess there's two things that I want to say about it. One is that, I just use that word adaptive. Now, these people have grown up in a very different time than we have. They have grown up with a different set of rules, a different set of expectations. So, of course, they're behaving differently. They're digital natives. They've grown up during numerous financial crises. They've seen, the advent of amazing technologies and the demise of companies that when we were growing up, shaped our understanding of what corporate life looked like. So, again, to get curious about the ways that their behaviors are a reflection of the context in which they grew up in. They have
Mhm.
adapted to a different set of circumstances. Now, I would like for us to get curious about the ways in which their adaptations could help us then to continue to adapt and evolve and grow in an environment that, is going to challenge anybody right now who's trying to do
Mhm.
strategy for the next several years. So, one, to kind of start with a curious embrace, if you will, of what
Yep.
it is that they're bringing rather than a sort of resistant
All
judgment of
right.
it.
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
And then two, to kind of say, listen, if we're going to be front footed about what is going to be required of us over the next 3 to 5 years to evolve at pace with AI and the manifold implications of it, wouldn't it be great if we had, some younger staff that was a key part of driving that? Because, I mean, you
Mhm.
mentioned my sons. It's like, I am already seeing the ways in which they move with it so fluidly. Um, so I think it's a requirement that we stop seeing them as entitled, lazy, drains on our resource who just won't behave the way we want them to, and start to say, okay, how am I going to utilize this resource? And how do I go about creating a culture that both, reflects some of what they're bringing and still
Hmm.
remains true to who we are?
Hmm.
Because nobody's
Yeah.
expecting you to bend over backwards and create something new that just suits them. So, yeah, to me, it's one of the paramount challenges for cultures and corporates and companies today. And
Love that.
I find it very exciting. I personally think it's a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. And you and I grew up in environments where when you joined an organization, you had to fit their model, right? You had to
Hmm. Hmm.
learn their modus operandi and adapt and adjust to that. Well, it's almost like the paradigm has shifted, not 180 degrees, but at least 90 degrees. To your point, it's got to be
Right?
a blending of the two, doesn't it? I mean, that's the best
Yeah.
goal or the best objective, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, yes, they're not coming into to working environments like we did. They are not coming in saying, yes, sir, no, sir, tell me where to go, sir,
Right,
ma'am.
right.
Um, and we feel either threatened or offended by that, because that's not how we behaved. We
Hmm.
want them to pay their dues. We feel like they're
Hmm.
entitled
Hmm.
because they want things that we thought we had to earn. But the
Hmm.
simple reality is that they've grown up in environments, we've raised them differently. They've gone to schools where they're treated differently. They've lived in a world where authority has evolved and it looks very different than it used to. So, I think what I talk about in the book is rather than fitting in, it's about finding the right fit.
Hmm.
So, how do we fit together? We're puzzle pieces that are trying to fit together as opposed to you fit into my square peg or shut up or get out.
Yeah.
They're not going to respond well to that. And I think it's incumbent upon us as today's senior leaders to embrace the fact that, yeah, culture's changing. We might not fully understand it, but it's the reality. We're not going
Hmm.
back. And so, creating thriving cultures, we treat a lack of compliance, if you will, as disorder.
Hmm.
We're afraid that it then leads to, acting out or lack of
Hmm.
productivity. But I think the truth is that it could actually lead to them making their best contribution under the right circumstances. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's an adjustment on all sides, but I think the potential is great.
Let's talk about two specific areas. We brought this up in the article. One is about learning, and the other is
Mm,
about managing, and how the younger generation today learns differently, or at least they have
mm.
different expectations around learning. And then similarly, Jill, I think, and you just touched on it a little bit, and as far as how do we manage them, how do we lead them, there are different standards, or there's at least a little bit different playbook with the younger generation in that regard, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're value learning and expect learning, perhaps again in a way that we didn't. We slotted into a role within a system and then executed on that role. And if we kept doing the same thing for 5 years, it was absolutely fine, right? I mean, we had a
Mhm.
very different vision of the path forward. So learning was almost a bonus, right? They don't see it as a bonus. They see it as a requirement. And yeah, some of that is self-serving, and that's what often gets thrown back in their face. They're going to learn something and then move on to the next place. But
Mhm.
again, they've grown up at a time where they're constantly learning and absorbing new information through media, social media, digital content. So they are quick learners, and we should figure out how to optimize that. And we should embed learning as part of a growth process that might not again look like a move up a hierarchy that frankly might not even exist anymore
Yeah.
as companies shrink and get smaller. So to me, the opportunities to learn are almost one of the biggest advantages that you can offer to a young person who's relatively new in the workforce. And that to me comes back to managing them. I think, obviously these are big generalizations and every individual is different, but there's been so much written about the sort of desire for autonomy, the desire for flexibility,
Hmm.
the desire for mastery. These are very different values than the ones we carried, where we felt safe if we were
Yeah.
held within a structure that told us what to do.
Hmm.
Um, they don't feel that way. They don't want that. Which doesn't mean that you say, cool, here's your budget, I'll talk to you in a week. There's ways I think of nodding to that desire for a little bit more room and respect that still maintains a degree of accountability for outcome and output and behavior.
Hmm.
Um, so to me, it's about that. It's holding people accountable for their contribution, as opposed to asking them to prove their loyalty or to prove their worth through their willingness to show up every day under very specific conditions. That to me feels very industrial era. It's like wanting to go back to people standing on a line or sitting at a desk typing and clocking in and clocking out. And I'm afraid
Hmm.
that's gone.
Yeah.
So the opportunity to create different kinds of ways of being held accountable for your contribution, I think is what we're talking about.
Love that. All right, so we're going to do another podcast on passion and curiosity. I think we need to do another one to dive deeper into Gen Z. But
I'd,
we've teased it.
mm,
We've teased it enough now, Jill, for about 20 some odd
yes,
minutes. We've teased the book. I think this
yes,
qualifies as a
that's what I'm
deep
here for.
tease now. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
That's what I'm paying you for, right? No, to talk
yeah,
about the book.
exactly.
Yeah. All right, 10 permissions. Tell us
Mm.
about kind of the genesis of it, if you will, and then what's your vision for it? I mean, what impact do you want it to have on individuals, organizations, people's lives? Tell us about 10
Mm.
permissions, please.
Sure. Well, I mean, I describe it as it sounds a little bit corny, but it really is the product of a life's work, and if I may say, the product of a lot of failure in terms of growth and change. All of that experience that I referenced in a variety of different circumstances of, big change efforts in corporates and very expensive change efforts in countries overseas, often which underdelivered, often
Mm,
which didn't meet exactly what the intention was. And I kind of kept coming back to what is it that keeps people from doing the things that they want to do or they know they should do in terms of adopting new behaviors, becoming, creating something new together. And this theme of permission kind of kept coming up for me because I would say to my colleagues, like, we can give people all the tools, all the money, everything we want. We can't give them permission. They
mm,
have to give it to themselves in terms of saying, I'm allowed to try something new. I'm allowed to behave differently. I'm allowed to have a conversation with my boss that feels scary
mm,
because I'm afraid there's going to be blowback if I do. I'm allowed to experiment with a new way of, managing my team. And that sense of authority and agency, which for me is what permission is all about and self-permission is all about, for me sits at the center of change. If you're always
mhm,
worried you're going to get in trouble, if you feel like you always have to have external approval in order to act in the face of change, making it or responding to it, then you're either going to be very sluggish or you're going to get stuck. You're going to be spend your
mhm,
time waiting around for somebody to tell you it's
mhm,
okay. And the
mhm,
basic theme, one of the lines I use in the book, is that to live in a time of nonstop change means embedding permission into your operating system because you've got to
mm,
be agile, you've got to be adaptive, you've got to be willing to try new things. And, a lot of us aren't because we're afraid. We're very much sort of welded to the idea that we require somebody else to give us the green light to act. So the idea of permission was born of a career kind of in change and growth, and what some of the, kind of issues were that kept people from changing. The 10 permissions themselves are really about how we begin to give ourselves permission to operate differently in this time of such great volatility and unprecedented change. So, these 10 sort of flip the script on how you're supposed to behave, how you're allowed to think about what you're allowed to do and be, and really to I describe it as a kind of new operating system, like not running on old 20th century software that tells you this is, how you're supposed to work, but really kind of intentionally updating your own mindset and approach for how you're going to navigate your life at work, your life at home. So yeah, I'm super excited. It comes out on September 16th in the States, and I think it's a really relevant contribution to everything that we're all trying to grapple with right now in terms of thriving in this world.
Love that. So let's talk about some of the 10. We don't have time to go through all 10, but I've
Yeah,
spotlighted a few of them because, they're different, and that's exactly what you're trying to accomplish. But the first one
yeah,
I highlighted, Jill, is go astray,
mm,
and maybe it goes back to the learning that we talked about earlier in the Gen
yeah,
Z discussion, but I think it's more global than that. But tell us about go astray, if you will.
yeah. So, I mean, from our earliest times, of course, we're taught to kind of stand in line, and the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and everything that was good was a straight line. And when we
Yeah,
imagined our career paths and when we imagined what progress looked like, it was usually straight, right? It was
yeah,
a sort
yeah,
of
yeah.
escalator up to ever greater authority and status and wealth. And for a lot of people, the reality is that doesn't exist anymore. The elevator stopped working a long time ago.
Yeah.
So, as I describe in the book, that linear progress, or that expectation of linear progress, is now obsolete for a lot of people. And in another case, it's undesirable, because what happens when you're kind of in that straight line, head down, is that you miss opportunities for learning and growth.
Hmm.
As I say in the book, what used to be a lifeline can now feel, like a tightrope, because if you're narrow and just looking forward, you can very easily get sort of, knocked over by things that you're not looking at. So
Hmm.
I talk about, very intentionally designing a more curving path for yourself. And yes, that could be a career path. Um, Building in change into your um, your growth and change model is critical, so that you are intentionally learning, you're intentionally sort of building your adaptive qualities. You no longer see doing the same thing over and over again for 20 years as the gold standard, because it's not going to happen, but maybe you don't want it to anyway, because
Hmm.
every time you turn, you learn. And that's the more desirable sort of alternative these days to that just pick your lane and stay in it for as long as you can.
Yeah. The well, you talked about the elevator. There's so many graphics that depict the escalator or the corporate ladder.
Totally.
So yeah, I love that. All right. So as you're talking about that kind of serpentine approach, another
Mm,
one that I highlighted is travel light, which is around, as you say, nimbleness. I would think
yeah.
that that's a close tie-in to what you were just saying, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, the mindset was to keep accumulating. The path was straight and gradual and accumulative. So you wanted to just keep getting more. And whether that was, assets or status or responsibility within an organization, that was what good looked like. And I think, at times, the preoccupation with that can limit your ability to learn and grow and be nimble. So what I
Yeah.
talk about again is not this is not an anti-accumulation message. It's more of a intentional one. So be aware that there are going to be times where, and we're seeing this more and more now, maybe you make a lateral move within your career because you're going to learn something by doing that. You might even say, I don't, we're reading all this stuff now about how, again, young people don't want to be middle managers because they see it as a bunch of responsibility and not a lot of growth. So they're
Right.
kind of going, I'll skip the extra salary in order to, remain more responsive to the opportunities that are around me. So I think it's
Hmm.
really optimizing for that responsiveness, instead of believing that the only way forward is to continually burden yourself with ever greater sort of responsibility and
Hmm.
materials and things that may or may not serve you in a very volatile world.
All right, let's give one more. I don't want to give all 10 because I want people to buy your book,
No,
Jill.
people need to buy the book.
You worked with not for profits. You're not a not for profit. So
I gave that up a long time ago.
yeah, right, right. Well, my wife keeps reminding me that I'm not owning a not for profit. But um, the other one that I spotlighted was forget about the future. Now, this is a bomb in many of our worlds.
Yeah,
Okay. I mean,
right.
the name of my company originated with strategy and looking to the future. You're
Right.
telling me I'm wrong, Jill, that I shouldn't do that anymore. Talk to us about forgetting
Yeah.
about the future.
I'm telling you that you shouldn't. So what I describe in the book is marry big intentions. So have a general idea of direction, but don't get hung up on the detail on it because you can't. I mean,
Hmm.
nobody can sit here right now and say, I know exactly what my industry is going to look like in 5 years'
Hmm.
time. And that can be a source of tremendous anxiety. And if we're going back to young people, it can kind of leave a lot of people feeling like perennially sort of insecure, understandably, because we've worked on 5 year plans and long term strategies. And then we've deduced from that what we should be doing now. And in the
Hmm.
absence of that long term vision, it can leave us feeling paralyzed to know what we should be doing now. So, yes, we need to work within shorter time frames and accept that that's just the way we have to operate for now. We can have a big sort of intention of what's sits in our future. And then, as I say, marry that with smaller intention and attention. So, the key right now is to be super alive and awake to what's going on right around you because things are moving so quickly that
Hmm.
your best investment is to be on your feet, kind of learning quickly and adapting as quickly as you possible to the changes that are coming at you. So, it's certainly not to say that you don't worry at all, but you don't expect to deduce your current actions from a predicted future. And I think
Hmm.
that's the biggest kind of script flip
Hmm.
is you can't, not with the clarity that we used to be able to. So, you've got to work in a slightly more inductive fashion. I
Hmm.
kind of describe it as the difference between, being on a paved path in a on a hike or in a nature reserve or something like that, where
Hmm.
you just get
Hmm.
to go, cool, that's where I'm going,
Right.
versus being in the woods.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and we're in the woods. So when you're in the woods, you kind of work through small steps and finding your way forward, and it can feel very unsettling, of course. But I think the more that we kind of accept it and normalize it to some extent and begin to adapt some of our ways of working around that, the more
Hmm.
that we can, accept the fact that within that lies tremendous potential for us to grow at a rate that wasn't possible when we
Hmm.
thought we knew what 5 years ahead looked like.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Love that. As you were talking through those three, and as I was reading through the other permissions, obviously they apply to us as individuals, but
Mm,
by extension, it is back to the culture piece, isn't it, Jill? I mean, all
sure.
of these
Of course.
permissions are really representative of changes we need to make from a cultural standpoint too, right?
Yeah, and a social standpoint. I mean, the
Yeah.
point of it is a lot of what I'm saying is, it's not news to you. None of it is like, oh, really? We all know that this is what we're currently experiencing. there's a little bit of a disconnect between, what we expected or what we're used to and what we are experiencing. And so that can lead to this kind of anxious uncertainty about, is it okay? Are we operating in the way that we should be? Are we going to be able to manage this? And I think as a culture in an organization, if you can begin to embed some of this permission to accept and embrace the fact that you've got to operate differently in this environment. And to me, that's just a no-brainer. I mean,
Mhm.
it's like talking to somebody in 1985 and who telling them that they need to operate differently than you did in, 1955. Of course you do.
Mhm.
It's being intentional about updating the ways that you approach, how you work together in order to optimize your ability to operate in this environment. In the
Mhm.
book, I say, 2025, not 1995. It's really different. Whether it's, Gen X and their expectations of work, whether it's AI, whether it's, global instability, whatever, pick your issue, we're
Mhm.
dealing with a very different set of variables that's requiring us to intentionally update our own set of approaches and expectations for how we succeed in this context. And I think these 10 permissions are about helping you to do that with greater clarity, greater confidence, not kind of hesitantly, but confidently moving through it. And yeah, a word I use in the book is courageously, because,
Mhm.
a lot of what's happening now is very half baked. It's like, for me, the whole work from home, return to work, it all feels a little reactive, as opposed to embracing the fact that this is the world as it is today. How are we going to create a workplace that really reflects the best of what we can do together right now, as
Mhm.
opposed
Yeah.
to reverting and defaulting back to the most familiar because that's what makes us feel comfortable? And it's challenging, but that's where, intentional conversations about, hey, what are we allowed to do together?
Mhm.
How do we
Yeah.
show up with each other in a way that really helps us, as you say, to collectively create something that is really fit for purpose for now?
Mhm.
Um, I think it's exciting. I think there's just such a tremendous moment for us if we're prepared to embrace it.
Well, love that. Love the whole concept of the book. I congratulate you for writing
Thank you.
it, and in
Thank
all
you.
sincerity, I thank you for writing it because you're going to affect lives. You're going to change the way people look at themselves, look at their work, and ultimately become happier in their with themselves and their organization. So, thank you for
Well,
doing
thanks.
that. You mentioned the date earlier, but in case we didn't make note of it, tell us when, where, all that kind of good stuff that your publicist told you had to talk about.
Yeah, September 16th, available obviously on through all digital platforms and in bookstores in the US. Yeah, it's an exciting time for me. As you said, I've spent my whole career trying to help people thrive in change, and I think we're at a moment where we all need a little bit of help to think about how we do this, how we do this well, how we do this happily. And if I can offer a contribution to that, I'm really honored to do so. So yeah, I'm looking forward to people reading the book. I'm looking forward to hearing how they react to it and make sense of it in their own lives and in their own offices. And yeah, kind of
Good.
continuing the conversation from there.
Well, we'll continue to help you keep it out there for our
Thank you.
audience at least, and there's various ways
Great.
that we'll do that. Okay, we need to
Awesome. Thanks, Paul.
land. We need to land this plane because I only paid for so many minutes and the meter's running out.
Okay,
So
bye.
let's do. Yeah, right, exactly. Um, thank you, Jill. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your input and your perspective. And well, we'll see you again down the road. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Take care.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. Bye.